So there have been thousands and thousands of MMA fighters, an even smaller number of UFC fighters, and an even smaller number of UFC fighters to hold the undisputed UFC championship belt. However, just because you hold the undisputed belt, that doesn't make you necessarily one of the best fighters in the fucking sport. Just look no further than people like Jamal Hill, Michael Bisping. Just some people in the sport have fluked their way into holding the belt, while others are great and have never held the belt. So that's what this list is going to be. The top 10 UFC fighters to have never held the undisputed belt. Let's get straight into it with the honorable mentions. The first honorable mention I'd like to talk about is Dan Henderson. Been around the UFC for so long. He was the champion at Pride. He beat a lot of people, such as Vanderlei Silva. He beat Vitor Belfort, Michael Bisping. Yeah, he beat a lot of people in the UFC, including Fedor Emelianenko, famously knocked out Fedor, upsetting him. Yeah, I think Dan Henderson deserves to be mentioned, but I don't think he deserves to be in the top 10 best. Next person, we have Uriah Faber. Uriah Faber was the champion over WEC for the longest time. However, I think some of the people that he beat while he was in the WEC is pretty weak, but I do think that he deserves to be mentioned as one of the best fighters to never hold the UFC belt. I mean, like, the WEC belt was basically the UFC belt at that point. You gotta mention Uriah Faber. He dominated for a long time before Cruz showed up. And then finally, for the last honorable mention, we have Chael P. Sonnen. Uncle Chael here. I think Uncle Chael deserves to be mentioned as one of the best fighters to never hold the belt, simply because of that first fight he had against Anderson Silva. So close to beating Silva. He didn't know that if you tapped, that it just ended the fight. He thought it ended the round. Closest we've gotten to seeing Silva get defeated in his prime. Chael P. Sonnen deserves a shout, but I think he kind of talked his way into a lot of his biggest fights. And anytime he faced someone really good, he most of the time lost, you know? So we have to talk about that. Anyways, let's get into the top 10, starting with number 10 on this list, which is Carlos Condit. If you remember prime Carlos Condit, he beat Rory McDonald, beat Dan Hardy, beat Nick Diaz, beat Thiago Alves, and he should have beaten Robbie Lawler. Everyone knows that that fight was basically a robbery. Carlos Condit beat Nick Diaz for the interim champ, and he was robbed against Robbie Lawler. I don't think a lot of Condit's wins have aged very well, but I do think that he should have been the champion by beating Robbie Lawler. So at number 10, we have Carlos Condit. At number 9 on this list, we have Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, one of the best strikers in UFC history. Unfortunately, Wonderboy literally has no fucking ground game whatsoever. He has good submission defense, but his ground game is just virtually non-existent. Wonderboy, first fight with Tyron Woodley, arguably should have gone to Wonderboy. Kind of a weird 10-8 round that they scored to Woodley. But yeah, I think that Wonderboy definitely should have gotten this fight and been the undisputed champion, but he was robbed. And then his longevity, his elite striking, obviously deserve him a spot on this list. Number 8 on the list, we got Alistair Overeem, the Reem monster. Look at this motherfucker. He's a freak of nature. Fucking roided to the gills. He beat everyone in heavyweight except for the champion. Fabricio Verdum, Brock Lesnar, Frank Mir, Steven Struve, Roy Nelson, JDS, Andrei Arlovsky, Sergey Pavlovich, Augusta Sakai, Mark Hunt, Vitor Belfort. These are all very good people to have on your resume. I think Overeem is definitely one of the greatest heavyweights of all time, but he just was never good enough to hold the belt. Lost to Ngannou, lost to Stipe, lost to Rosenstrike, lost to Blade. Overeem deserves to be on this list, definitely, but he definitely is not going to be as high because just look at this motherfucker. He's 100% on steroids, alright? Number 6 on this list, we got El Kakui, Tony Ferguson. Now listen, everyone who follows me knows I'm not a big fan of this guy. I think he's kind of a nut job. He kind of gets overrated when people talk about him, but he definitely deserves to be mentioned mentioned as one of the greatest people to never hold the belt. So Tony Ferguson famously went on a 13-fight win streak, beating Cowboy Cerrone, beating Anthony Pettis, beating the likes of RDA and other names. But his fall off, you can't just completely dismiss his fall off. All of the best fighters he fought, he lost. Oliveira and Michael Johnson, you know. He was basically the Tom Aspinall to Habib, you know what I mean? He was the interim champion, defended his interim belt multiple times. He was also the interim champion under Conor, I'm pretty sure, if I'm remembering correctly. Tony Ferguson definitely deserves to be mentioned as one of the greatest fighters to never hold the belt. The next person we have on this list at number 6 is Nick Diaz. Now look, Nick Diaz was the Strikeforce welterweight champion from 2010 to 2011. Most notably, people remember him for his fight against Paul Daly. He had a fight against GSP. He had a fight against Anderson Silva. Famously knocked out Robbie Lawler. Obviously, he lost to Carlos Condit in the interim title fight, but just because you lose to someone doesn't mean that you're better or worse than them. Like, clearly, we can all agree that Kamaru Usman is a better fighter than Leon Edwards, even though Leon beat Usman twice. Just because you lose to someone twice, that doesn't override your legacy. I think that applies to Nick Diaz as well, being better than Carlos Condit. Diaz fought a lot of people. He beat a lot of people. He's most famously known for getting his prime cut short by a stupid ass marijuana suspension, robbing us of a lot of Nick Diaz's prime. What could he have done? But yeah, he beat people like BJ Penn. Already said this, Paul Daly. He beat Frank Shamrock. Just beat a lot of people. Gleason Tibau. These are people Nick Diaz beat. Nick Diaz, I think he should be on this list, should be mentioned. The next person we have on this list is Joseph Benavidez. If you've ever watched the first fight with Joseph Benavidez and Mighty Mouse, you will just know how good Joseph Benavidez was. He arguably won the first fight against Mighty Mouse. He cleared out the entire flyweight division. You know what I mean? Like, he was basically like, you know how Robert Whittaker and Izzy, or like Colby Covington and Usman, or Max Holloway and Volk? He was that to Mighty Mouse, you know what I mean? He was just the one that stood right outside the gate to try to fight Mighty Mouse. Yeah, he beat Cejudo, I'm pretty sure. Alex Perez, Dustin Ortiz, Formiga, Cejudo, Tim Elliott. He beat basically Ian McCall, every single person at flyweight. He only lost to Demetrius Johnson, Dominic Cruz, and then he fell off later in his career, but he only lost to Davison Figueiredo, Sergio Pettis, Demetrius Johnson, and Dominic Cruz. Those are not bad people to be losing against. Benavidez deserves to be mentioned as one of the greatest people to never hold the belt. Let's move on to the next one, which is number 4 on this list is Anthony Rumble Johnson, most famously known for his knockout over Glover Teixeira. I mean, his knockout over Glover Teixeira was fucking crazy. Yeah, unfortunately for Anthony Johnson, the person he had to fight for the title was Daniel Cormier. But besides that, he beat Gustafsson, beat Glover Teixeira, beat Ryan Bader, beat Phil Davis, beat Nogueira, beat Dan Hardy. He beat basically everybody, and he was scary as fuck too. When he fought you, he knocked you out. That's why I gotta include Rumble Johnson this high on the list, is because whenever he knocked you out, he put you out cold, bruh. Like, he had a nasty highlight reel. Unfortunately, had no ground game whatsoever. Basically, all of his losses are submissions, and basically all of them are basically rear naked chokes. We'll talk about Dustin in a second, alright? But yeah, never got to hold the title just because he had to fight DC for his 2 title shots, but everyone knows how good Rumble was back in the day. But he's not even the best light heavyweight on this list. Which brings me to number 3 on this list, Alexander Gustafsson. If you look at Alexander Gustafsson's resume by itself, it's not that impressive, He's 18-8. You look at who he beat. He beat Shogun, Jan Blachowicz, Glover Teixeira, and that's really his only great wins. But then you look at his fight with John Jones, and you look at his fight with Daniel Cormier. I honestly think that you could give the DC fight to Gustafsson, and that is a legendary win to have on your resume. But at the same time, the John Jones fight, the first one or 2 more punches from Gustafsson, and he wins that fight. I do think that Jones won the fight, but he was the first person to give John Jones a hell of a fight. He has a split decision with Daniel Cormier, and it should be a very close fight with John Jones. 2 of the top 10 fighters of all time. You gotta have Alexander Gustafsson up here. Unfortunately, bro was an Anthony Smith victim, so we can't count it too much, but that was kind of during his fall off. We can't discount his fall off. Number 2 on this list is another person that's similar to Alexander Gustafsson, Yoel Romero. I swear to God, people glaze Israel Adesanya. Think about how scared Israel Adesanya was to strike with this fucking guy, bro. He turned Israel Adesanya into the Israel Adesanya that we know today, the boring ass striker. He hit Izzy once, and Izzy said, I'm never getting hit like that ever again. I'm just going to kick it range, you know? This guy arguably beat Adesanya in that fight as well. Robert Whittaker, both times. One of them could have been a draw. One of them could have gone to Yoel. That fight was razor close. 2 of the best middleweights of all time, Adesanya and Robert Whittaker, could both go on this guy's resume. This guy is like the GOAT robberies as well, because then you look at the Paulo Costa fight. I honestly think Yoel should have won the Paulo Costa fight as well. And then you look at the fucking fight he had with Phil Davis in Bellator. That was a split decision as well. That should have gone to Yoel as well. So the judges just hate this fucking guy, I guess because he's like a communist experiment or whatever. I think that Yoel Romero is definitely one of the best fighters. He was an Olympic wrestler, should have wins over Adesanya, should have a win over Robert Whittaker, should have a win over Paulo Costa. This guy deserves to be in there with the best people, you know? So, and you look at his wrestling record, he only lost to like Cael Sanderson, who's like the GOAT of wrestling. So that has nothing to do with MMA whatsoever. I just wanted to mention that, alright? Here's the other thing to think about. This guy made his UFC debut when he was 36. 36 years old, he made his UFC debut. Think of what would have happened to the UFC if this guy decided to come when he was in his fucking prime. This guy would have fucking put everyone out cold if he decided to come and start MMA sooner, but unfortunately Yoel Romero decided to start UFC when he was 36 years old. So let's move on to the final entry into this list, which is Dustin the Diamond Poirier. Now let me say this, if Dustin Poirier held the undisputed UFC gold, we would be talking about him as a top 10 fighter of all time. That's not ridiculous. That's not ridiculous to say that. Let me just list off Dustin Poirier's resume. Conor McGregor twice. We got Carlos Diego Ferreira. We got Bobby Green, Jim Miller, Anthony Pettis, Justin Gaethje, Eddie Alvarez, Max Holloway twice, Dan Hooker, Michael Chandler, BSD, and then a whole bunch of other people from fucking WEC. We talk about Volkanovski being one of the greatest fighters of all time for beating Max Holloway twice. 3 times. If Dustin Poirier beats Max Holloway the 3rd time, how are we going to talk about him? I'm being for real. Dustin Poirier is one of the greatest fighters to ever step foot on the face of this planet. But unfortunately, every time he's fought for the title, he's had to fight the greatest fighters to ever live in Islam Makhachev, Charles Oliveira, and Khabib Nurmagomedov. Dustin Poirier has never lost 2 fights in a row in his entire career. The most finishes in UFC lightweight history. He has a career at featherweight and lightweight. Started the sport young, been in it forever. He got offered to fight for the vacant belt once Khabib retired, and he decided to go fight Conor instead. But unfortunately, he was a dumbass. Well, not a dumbass, he's a multimillionaire now, but gave up legacy for money. Dustin is really, really, really good. Has 7 wins over former or future champions. He beat Max Holloway twice. He beat Conor twice. That's 4. Alvarez, Pettis, and Gaethje as interim champ. That's 7 wins over champions. Dustin Poirier is one of the best fighters to ever step foot on this planet. Literally, I just made this entire video to glaze Dustin. I really want Dustin to win, bro. He's my favorite fighter ever. So that is the list. My top 10 greatest fighters to never hold the belt. Please let me know who your best fighters are in the comments below, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.